afternoon to all of you, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome. I'm super delighted to be your moderator this year. You would have recognized me as the host in previous years, but I'm really, really glad to be facilitating this chat with three very, very distinguished speakers. And wow, the solutions that we've seen today are incredible. I think we were just chatting among ourselves that the popular vote itself was quite hard to determine. But let me paint some broad strokes to our conversation here this afternoon. Earlier, you would have seen our TLC 2025 finalist teams in action, showcasing their disruptive technologies. TLC has always been a signature event of ecosperity, so you're definitely at the right place if you like a dose of optimism and inspiration. This is our 8th year, and the platform has grown since inception tremendously. And we've also heard a lot about the different ways in which we can mobilize capital to scale up sustainability solutions at ecosperity, especially as Asia races towards its 2030 emission targets. And I love that TLC is really the ground zero for action, because it is here that capital is deployed into real-world solutions and having real-world impact. We've had Bill Gates speak at ecosperity this week about the need to really scale innovations and build ecosystems. We've had experts, business leaders, financiers talk about catalytic funding and the role that it plays in climate solutions. But besides the access to finance, the question that has often been posed is, what is that X factor that truly enables an idea to succeed? And in truth, it is a combination of factors, not just one, and the ability to create that confluence of factors that determines failure or success. And here in Singapore, the sustainability innovation ecosystem has grown over the years to become a vibrant and exciting landscape in which possibilities are endless. So it's with this backdrop that I turn to Madeline to start us off. With your role overseeing urban solutions and sustainability at Enterprise Singapore, what do you define as the X factor? And what are some of the critical aspects that really help startups move from the prototype stage into commercial markets?
Thanks very much for having me here. Hi everyone, my name is Magdalene. If you ask me if there's one single factor, it's very difficult to pinpoint. As you mentioned earlier, Jess. For me, I think that it would be actually a balance of certain factors that contribute to a startup's scalability and exportability. And some of these factors include how effective is the technology vis-a-vis the price point that the customer is willing to accept. And the third point is the ease of implementation. We actually do interact with quite a number of startups that emerge out of, for example, research institutes or IHLs. And many do show very promising results from the lab and even up to pilot scale point. Then the question will be, at what price can the consumer or the adopter take it on? And they will be comparing against what they are using today. So this will be one of the balancing acts that I think will be the magic potion or X factor that startups do need to see. And the third factor we do see very often is the ease of implementation. Because today, many of the climate tech solutions that we're seeing do need to interact with existing infrastructure, existing systems that clients would be already used to, and how would these tech solutions integrate? And many times you do need the buy-in internally within the organization, not just with the innovation team. You know, there are different facets of the clients that would need to get the buy-in of as well. So I think it will be a balance of these three factors. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Madeline. Mark, I'll come to you. You're chairman at Seatrium, but I know you also led Shell's renewables business, and you're an active mentor to many climate innovations. And what are your thoughts on what the X factor is?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And although people know me here mainly because I chair Seatrium, but I do a lot of stuff in the startup space. I actually have my own startup. I'm one of the founders of a startup in the UK at the moment, which was about to go out for seed funding. So I kind of know the pain of early stage venturing, and also I looked after Shell's corporate venture capital outfit, Shell Ventures, for 4 years. So I've seen a lot of early stage companies. First thing I have to say is all of the companies that presented today, amazing, really high quality and high caliber, great ideas, and all of them have a real world application. And that's one of the things that people often struggle with. They have a great technology, a great idea, but there isn't a market for it. There isn't a real demand. There isn't a proper use case. But if there is a good use case, the thing that you look at as an investor as the X factor is the people. Because when it's not just you're investing in a technology, you're investing in the people behind the technology and the ones that are going to bring it to market. So that was the number one thing that I always look for is, are the people going to be able to make this a success? Do they have the sort of vision? Do they have the drive? Do they have the skills to develop the business? And of course, what you see is that very often, the founders of a business are fantastic at the first stage. Maybe they can't do the scaling up because there's a big transition that a startup has when it goes from seed funding through Series A, Series B, and all the rest. So that's the X factor. It's the people. It's the people that are good enough to see the original idea, drive it, get the funding, because if you don't have the funding, you can't do anything, and then the ability to actually scale the business up. And very often, founders and early stage companies, they massively underestimate how difficult it is to scale up from the early pilot stage of their ideas into demonstration and then full-scale commercial operation. But X Factor is like the X Factor on TV, it's the people.
That's great, Mark. But just building on some of your points, we've seen this year that it's been sort of a global chaos. Internationally, we've seen trade tensions, geopolitical risks. Do you see that as having a great impact on the capital that's being deployed, on the success rate for climate startups, in fact?
It's to be honest, it's a disaster at the moment in terms of if you don't have a long cash runway as a startup, you could be in trouble. It's going to take people a lot longer to raise money now than it has done. So those of us that have been in the climate tech space for a while have seen these cycles of, unfortunately, post-pandemic, we had massive over-exuberance, people were investing at crazy valuations. And now there's a hangover effect from that. So people binged, now it's a massive hangover, and everybody is extremely reticent. And indeed, some of the sectors that were represented in the companies here, that it's a really tough gig to raise money at the moment. So I think it is a tough time. Of course, the whole world at the moment, there's massive uncertainty. People aren't hiring, they aren't investing. A lot of things have slowed down, so it makes it extra tough. So I think the important thing, for early stage companies is don't underestimate the amount of time it's going to take to raise money. And when you do raise money, raise enough so you're not continuously raising money. Because as a founder of the business, you've got to run the business and develop the business. If you're constantly fundraising, then you can't focus on the business itself.
Those are really good points. Thank you, Mark. Dasrul, I'll come to you. You were one of the finalists last year, and then Dina has gone on to do really amazing things. But, what are some of the challenges that you face, post-TLC, and given the global economic climate as well? Tell us about, your journey.
Thank you, Jessica, for having us back here. It's really great to be back here. So challenges that we see, of course, is with any startup to attract capital. What in our experience, what has benefited us is when we have investors who understand the systemic change that we are building and understand the long runway that we have to deploy the solutions that we are putting out. I think the other challenge that we also face is really to get them sort of like the commercial validation of our technological solution. So how we overcome this is really to work very closely with our customers to continually do innovation and dialogue with them, to continually refine our solutions. And we realize that it's not something that we can solve ourselves just by one company in a hard-to-abate sector like aviation where we are in. So that's why we created this consortium together with other founding partners like Qantas, GEMCO. It's called the Aviation Circularity Consortium. It's really to scale the adoption of circular materials in the manufacturing of aerospace parts. So that's how we've been overcoming some of these challenges.
Wonderful. Magdalene, I'll come back to you because we're here in Singapore, and of course, Ecosperity is a fixture in the calendar for climate action and mobilizing capital as well as energizing business leaders, etc. How does Singapore play that key role of being the hub and the test bed for these climate solutions, and what sort of I guess, regulatory frameworks enable us to be, that sort of, have that sort of status?
Thanks very much. Actually, if you ask me, one of the things that Singapore has is really trying to build an ecosystem that encourages startups to scale. Many of the challenges that Mark and Desiree mentioned, access to financing, working with an investor, working with a client who is able to put in and commit the resources, we try to catalyze some of that. And one of the things that we do is to work very closely with the industry as well as the RIHLs and the research community in Singapore and overseas to create some initiatives to enable some of these things. Of course, many of the negotiations are on a commercial basis, but what we try to do is to identify demand drivers, buyers who could potentially work with these startups. We have various platforms to do that. And the government itself, for example, the Housing Development Board of Singapore, the JTC in Singapore, we ourselves are some of the lead demand drivers. We have open innovation platforms to take on some of these new technologies, not just with the objective of helping Singapore's needs, but also to see how we can proliferate and provide startups with some of these track records. And this allows also the startups to have real-time deployment. They can fine-tune their problems and also understand what the end user would probably face in the future when they scale. Secondly, I think we try to, one of the issues that Mark talked about was also talent. We may not be the best teachers, but we work with people who could be the best teachers. So we do try to attract venture builders, accelerators in specific fields to work with some of these founders who may not have the experience of commercializing their products today. In the climate tech field, for example, we do work with Imagine H2O. It's a US-based accelerator where they have worked with more than 50 startups in Singapore and brought them to 12 countries across the Asia Pacific. We've also launched a partnership together with Temasek and Breakthrough Energy Fellow Southeast Asia to help companies in the climate tech space looking in the Southeast Asia region to see and provide mentorship and more importantly, the access for market access and regional opportunities in the region. So we try to build that pool. And lastly, I know the investment climate is a little bit poor at the moment, but we still try to anchor some of the key funds in Singapore as well. It's a whole of government effort to do so. And within the government as well, we also have our own venture arm, where we work with other venture capitalists and other investors to try to catalyze some of these investments. And of course, it spans many sectors, but sustainability and climate tech is one of the key pillars as well. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. Mark, you are a global citizen, and thank you for coming all the way down from London to join us here. But I know you're very well traveled, between the two cities. What is it about Singapore that, perhaps could provide that unique testbed or location for startups? And is there anywhere else in the world that you feel also, give climate technological innovations a good chance at success?
Yeah, I think traditionally climate tech was focused more in the US, especially on the West Coast, and also in Europe, because what helps you need to have a kind of VC ecosystem that can really encourage you, the like-minded people to hang out with. There are lots of potential people to fund your business. So being part of an ecosystem is kind of important. And traditionally, historically, there wasn't a great VC and early stage ecosystem in Southeast Asia. I think it's actually developed a lot over the last 10 years. Things have really come a long way. I see many more sort of interesting startups coming out of this part of the world. And I think Singapore is in a great position to be a hub for the region and to attract a lot of talent. And that's what you see happening is people will come to Singapore and set up shop here for an early stage company because they're then part of that ecosystem. I think also, to be honest, the government here does a great job of encouraging things through things like Enterprise Singapore and other organizations that help to provide some of that seed funding. One of the other ecosystem things that's really important for early stage companies is the link between the academic world and the commercial world. So historically, the Americans were very good at making that bridge from academia into the commercial world. They kind of had a global lead versus everywhere else. That's it's getting better in other places as well. I mean, one of the things I'm doing at the moment is chairing a startup, which is a spin out from Oxford University in the UK. And Oxford set up their own venture capital fund, Oxford Science Enterprises, to provide seed funding for those sort of ventures. So we wouldn't have grown as quickly if we didn't have OSE behind us. And I think there are similar schemes here in Singapore which can help enable people to grow quickly. So I'm very optimistic about the future for early stage companies in Singapore. I think things are really developing well, and I think it will go from strength to strength and be a very competitive hub for venture capital investors. The only one additional thing that I would recommend is that in the UK, one of the reasons companies get a lot of angel investing funding is an incredibly generous tax break for doing that. So, no, but in Singapore, your taxes aren't that high to start off with, so you probably don't need it anyway.
Thank you so much, Mark. We shall communicate that message to our regulators. But Dejro, coming to you, as the management team of a startup founder, how has being based in Singapore helped you, or maybe hindered you? And is there, some regulatory bugbears that you feel need to break free, not just Singapore, but anywhere, that enables, this sort of innovation to reach commercial success a little quicker?
Yes, I think it's been a great benefit being a startup, a small company here in Singapore, like what Magdalene and Mark has mentioned. There's a lot of opportunities and grants and partnerships with research institutes and all that to really scale. So I can share from Nandina's experience. When we started recovering materials from these end-of-life assets, starting with the retired aircraft, we discovered there was a lot of end-of-life carbon fiber material. And there's definitely a technical need to recover these high-value materials. Currently, only about maybe 5% of carbon fiber materials are being recycled. So we were very intentional. We went into the local research ecosystem to find partners who are already working on such technology. And we identified them in several institutes in A-Star. And we've worked very well with them, and we've tapped onto the various public-private partnership grants and initiatives that we have here in Singapore. We've been able to, because there's that alignment of technical need as well as a commercial pathway for recycled carbon fiber as well. So we've been able to move it from the lab in A-Star. Now we are setting up a pilot facility, but we've also launched sort of like a small volume of aviation-grade recycled carbon fiber that has already customers already. So yeah, we've definitely benefited from this ecosystem here in Singapore. As to challenges, that certain bugbears are that in highly regulated sectors like aviation, there's sometimes the regulations are unclear. So what we have to do is really map out with our different stakeholders the clear pathways for certification, for compliance, and for traceability, such that our solutions can be adopted at scale. Yeah.
Amazing, thank you. I'm going to come to the audience for questions, and you can either submit them through Slido, which is going to be flashed here, or you can raise your hand and I will come to you. But as you guys put in your questions, I'm going to pose one to all three of you. We've talked a lot about public-private partnerships and at PAS, maybe also philanthropic partnerships. What are some success stories that you've seen, whether it's Singapore, Asia, or the world, that you think we should emulate more of? Magdalene, maybe I come to you on some private-public partnerships that you're very proud of.
Okay. Actually, I have so many that I can't. It's
That's
a
good
bit
news.
hard for me to think of it. But actually, maybe more closer to home, maybe because that's where we interact more with the companies based in Singapore. It's amazing that we managed to work in a very small market. So we do have companies across the water sector, the built environment sector, who have seen some form of success. Of course, not they are not unicorns yet. So one example would be companies like Gush. I think there was a colleague that was also talking about aerogels earlier. We also have companies we've seen who have built a commercial model around sustainable paints, and they have a value proposition of, for example, purifying the air, dehumidifying the air, eliminating bacteria. And though it does come with a little bit of premium, it does bring commercial value to the customers. They have also created different types of products catering to different needs of the developers. So, for example, in Singapore, where manpower cost is a big deal, they created a type of paint that only requires the contractors to paint it once across. So it reduces the amount of paint they need as well as the manpower needed to paint a development. So there are examples like Gush as well. We've also worked with companies like Apresium, which is a company that detects contaminants in municipal waters, and they've seen quite a good success and managed to scale across the region as well. So quite encouraging. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. Mark, any?
Yeah, I wanted to take a slightly different approach to this question, because there's lots of good examples of public-private partnerships to get things going. The problem is deploying things at scale, and the whole scaling up thing, where, to be honest, if you're any company, and particularly an early stage company, you're managing three things: technology risk, market risk, and regulatory risk. And normally, technology risk often is the least of the problem. The problem is the market going to develop the way expected? And is there a supportive policy framework and regulation? And unfortunately, there are too many cases in the climate tech space where the market hasn't developed as we expected because of an ever-changing landscape for policy and regulation. And the biggest thing that, public bodies could do to encourage the private sector is to have a bit more consistency. So if the government here says, yeah, we're definitely going to have a carbon tax that's going to go up in the future, then they need to deliver on that, because otherwise you're building your business on a market opportunity that could be massively delayed. We're seeing at the moment there's a lot of companies in the green hydrogen space that are really struggling because of market risk, because the market's taking longer to develop than expected. Or EV charging businesses that now people are walking back on their EV targets and the market's slowed down. So it would be really great if governments could get a bit more consistent. I think that's another reason why it's good here in Singapore, because the government is generally more consistent in its policy outlook than other countries. And to be honest, in a lot of places, trust has kind of broken down between governments and the private sector. So the more you can create that sort of trust that we're all on the same page, and by the way, the policy isn't going to change with every electoral cycle, I think that would give us a much better chance to scale up all of these technologies that we desperately need.
Super well said, Mark. And we just had our elections here as well, so there's some consistency for sure. But Desru, over to you. Any sort of thoughts on some of successful partnerships, like in your case or around you maybe?
Yeah, I'll share from our perspective. So we've been able to tap onto one good initiative that is from EDB as well as from ESG is this, where we could partner with larger companies or corporate partners, local SMEs like ourselves, and we can tap into grants for capability transformation. And in this case, it's really for us to work with these corporates to, what we do is we supply our circular materials to them and see how we can innovate together to create both the material IP and the product IP to incorporate circular materials into their existing manufacturing processes. And this has been great. We've been speaking with consumer goods companies like luggage companies that are interested in using carbon fiber, for example, in their luggage shells. We're also speaking with companies in the space sector that are thinking about new kinds of materials for satellite radiation shielding. So this kind of initiative that brings together larger corporates together with SMEs has been great for us.
Wonderful.
Sorry, can I just add on? Actually, I feel that the challenge of regulatory certainty applies even to some of our larger companies who are looking to diversify into newer sustainable products. I'll give you an example, right? We have a company called Pan United, which does carbon mineralized concrete. Basically, you inject the carbon dioxide into concrete to make it greener and also a form of carbon capture. Because it's a new material, Singapore has never seen it before, then of course there will be a certain process to give the developer certainty that this concrete would be suitable, it would be durable, and it would be safe for the residents. So I just want to acknowledge that there are certain challenges towards that as well, but it does need to be worked out.
Yeah, and I think that's where the governments really need to take leadership to provide that assurance, that technical, I suppose, standards that are so important to actually scale these solutions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you want to add? Yeah. Okay, we're going to come to questions, but anyone wants to ask a question in person? Taking the opportunity? No? Okay, well, you guys think of a question to ask in person. We're going to come to this really interesting one that's coming through Slido, and that's from Sandy. Is venture capital suitable for capex-heavy climate tech? That's a good question. How does limited public exit potential affect investor interest? Mark, I'm going to...
Yeah, the simple answer to is venture capital suitable for capex-heavy climate tech is not really. So if you've got you developed a brilliant new advanced biofuels process, it's worked in the lab, it's worked demonstration level, then you've got to build your first commercial plant. By the way, it's between $500 million and $1 billion for the first plant. Then your venture capital interest in that is going to fall away pretty fast because the ticket size is just too big for most venture capital funds. So, this is one of the problems with a lot of the capex-heavy climate tech. Why it struggle is to make that transition from the venture funding into being funded either by a strategic or private equity. So very often, if you've got a capex-heavy thing, as a venture capitalist, you'll be looking at an exit, which is a trade sale or bringing in strategics that are going to make those much bigger investments. So I think it depends a bit on the scale of how capex heavy it is. But for the most part, that is very tricky to fund with just pure venture capital alone.
Really interesting. Magdalene, from the seeds capital point of view.
Yeah. I think in the initial early stages, probably possible. We've seen some of the companies in, for example, doing solar, doing perovskite cells, managing to secure some form of VC capital. But as Mark mentioned, when it scales, then you probably have to look at different forms of financing. Yeah.
That's great. I'm going to move on to the next question, which
I guess it's for me.
Is Singapore a good base for climate tech to scale in Southeast Asia, or is it too different from its neighbours? Maybe Dazril can answer this one because, you look at Southeast Asia, Asia is your market, or actually the world is your market, right?
Yeah, I would say, I repeat it, it's a good base for us. It's been a good base for us because we have been able to develop IP here. There's a research ecosystem for that. And for us to scale, we have been able to tap on grants, tap on this PPP as well for us to start scaling. But I think we are also then eyeing expansion in other places as well, where we can get more regular feedstock that we are looking out for, where we have more of the end-of-life materials from the aircraft, from wind turbines, for example, and things like that. Yeah.
Interesting. Magdalene?
Yes, I need to add on. I would say every country has their own needs and their own priorities. Where Singapore is a good place to scale is that we try to build networks within Southeast Asia. So even for Enterprise Singapore, how we do it is that we do build innovation alliances across the world, not just in Southeast Asia. Today we have 24 nodes of our Global Innovation Alliance, and it's not just about helping companies understand the market, it's also about helping the companies to gain access into the markets, into the demand drivers, but the process of understanding the customer, how to tailor your products to that specific market still exists.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with Singapore being different from its neighbors, because if you think about Silicon Valley, it's very different from the rest of America. In fact, the whole of California is very different from the rest of America, so that isn't a bad thing at all. And I think some of those differences are positive for early stage companies.
Yeah, very good point. The next question, what is a potentially overlooked area of climate tech?
This is my personal view. Part of our work also looks at climate adaptation. So actually, climate tech, a lot of it is geared towards mitigation today, how we deal with the energy transition, how do we deal with circular economy. But further down the road, we do know that temperatures are going to rise. There's going to be rising sea levels. There's going to be potential floods and all that. These are a little bit further out, even as we start to look at climate adaptation in coastal protection, in urban heat resilience. There were some of the companies already looking at it today. I think it's one area that we could look a little bit more into.
Yeah, absolutely 100% agree with that. I mean, that's really an adaptation thing people are only starting to get to grips with now. The other generally overlooked area in the whole of the climate tech space is energy efficiency. As the great Amory Lovins from Rocky Mountain Institute once said, negawatts are better than megawatts. So I do feel, and energy efficiency is kind of considered to be a bit unsexy and it's not groundbreaking, but there's lots of really interesting technologies that improve efficiency of almost everything we do. So I think that's an area that is due a revival soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, if you think about the 2 tracks we had this year, the Cooler Earth track was actually a little bit more on the climate adaptation, and that's where you get, the innovations like the cooling gel, etc. Because I think we have to face up to the reality that we're facing a climate crisis, and that's something that we've seen the multilateral banks as well, and the United Nations actually putting a lot more emphasis on climate adaptation and resilience. So we hope that investors in the room also look at that area. Okay, question from someone in person. Excellent. Can we get a microphone to Milena? Thank you. You can maybe quickly identify yourself.
Sure. My name is Milena. I'm partner at Antares Ventures. We're a deep tech climate solutions focused fund. So I'm a contrarian to Mark. I clearly believe that there is a great investment opportunity in transformative climate solutions, and we also a seeds capital partner. So our way of ensuring or helping our startups succeed in a difficult environment is to partner them up with corporates and give them those commercial connections early on. But then one thing we keep on keeping in mind is the full capital stack is not available in the region. And I'm talking here about debt financing as well, not just equity where we come in. Input from the panel would be appreciated.
Good question.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I don't, just because I've mentioned efficiency doesn't mean I don't believe that, some very fundamental innovation is required as well. And the deep tech space is super exciting. We need some more radical innovation coming through. But I agree, probably one of the areas that's a little bit underdeveloped is the early stage companies' access to debt financing. This part of the world is more tricky, I would say, than some other areas. So yeah, that's something that definitely could be changed. It was one of the things actually was being discussed in Ecosperity this morning about making debt funding more available to companies that are in the clean tech space. And I think it's also an area where there's a role for more of the concessionary finance to be debt financing rather than equity. That would really help.
Yeah, I think Dylan was.
I mean, and often, to be honest, what I see is often debt financing for early stage companies comes with so many onerous terms that as a startup you don't want to take it because it's going to, it's just going to constrain you over time.
Absolutely. I think Dylan made the same point yesterday at Ecosperity as well, holding the banks accountable or calling them to action on this aspect. But Dajor, have you had that sort of challenge in terms of debt finance?
Exactly what Mark said. We do find it quite onerous to get debt financing, and we are looking into that seriously because when we want to build this pilot facility, it's quite capex heavy in terms of the equipment, in terms of the machining. So we're definitely looking at debt financing.
Wonderful. That's great. Magdalene?
We also acknowledge the issue. We tried to ease some of it, at least for the Singapore companies looking for financing in Singapore. We do have schemes that the government backs some of the green loans that are going out, but it will face the similar issues of, will a startup want to embark on the requirements required by the banks? Yep.
Wonderful. The next question here is an interesting one. Oh, actually, it's been replaced. But it was around advice, you know, because I think there was also a question around the cost of building startups in Singapore being quite high, and that your chance of success might be impacted by that. I think one of the other areas as well, which I often hear from, you know, impact funds and venture capitalists, is that the pipeline of entrepreneurs in Asia is not necessarily as, you know, full as it should be because of, you know, sort of the Asian culture of like not embracing entrepreneurship, which, you know, has been changing a lot. But I think the environment to kind of enable successful founders has been quite different and evolving. So with that in mind, perhaps, you know, with that question on what kind of advice you would give to climate tech startups in this region hoping to make it, what would that be? Dasro, you're living the dream right now, so.
I think really the strategic partnerships is really the key for success. And like I mentioned, we really depend a lot on a consortium-based approach with partners to scale our solutions. It really needs alignment of a lot of things. Obviously, the policy, regulation, and then in terms of the commercial demand as well as the technical feasibility as well. All of these have to be aligned, and it really requires us to be deeply connected with the various stakeholders and get together to really move things forward for us.
One thing that I'd add is, once you're into some serious funding rounds, you want to look for investors who bring more than just money. So, you know, so investors who bring sort of early deployment opportunities or help you directly with the scale up, tremendously valuable. Or, you know, if it's a pure financial investor, but one that's sort of committed to working with you to help you to grow the business, that brings some sector expertise, you know, can advise you on that stuff. So getting the right investor set is super important. The other thing, in terms of being successful about, you know, being able to pitch and raise money in the first place, one of the consistent things I see is that a lot of founders, they can have tunnel visions. They've got this thing and they believe it's a great thing, but they've got no awareness of the competitive landscape. And so they've got this great thing, but it's not, they haven't thought about how it's going to be competitive versus all the other alternatives there are. So having that ability to look a bit more widely, I think is important. A lot of you know, firms that have that awareness, they often do it because they've got so good, they get a small advisory board or something, and you don't need to pay people much for that. Give them a bit of, you know, sort of deferred equity or something. Don't spend too much cash on advisors, but getting the right broader perspective, because, you know, when you're working on your one thing, you kind of got tunnel vision around delivering that one thing, but the world is a much bigger place, and you've got to know how you rank versus all the competing technologies.
Super good point. And I think, you know, just as the final question to wrap up the panel, we've had such an interesting conversation, and I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions, although I think we did quite well there. What is the one thing that you could change that you think would move the needle on scaling climate tech innovations, helping climate tech innovations get the X factor and become successful? Dasru?
Again, I'll go back to really a coordinated ecosystem approach is required. It's really to really move, for us, circularity from being the exception to being the expectation and really the norm. So really a coordinated ecosystem approach with various stakeholders.
Thank you.
For me, it's really about almost similar, but to scale is really about building the networks within the region. How do we do that to catalyze some of the industry opportunities for the startups in the region? Thanks.
Yeah.
I think it's impossible to pin it down to one thing, because it's most successful businesses. It's a combination of things that you have to get right. The reality is that often when you're scaling up, there's a lot of conservatism in most industries. So when I was in charge of Shell Ventures, we had a whole team that worked on actually deploying the technologies we're investing in Shell's core business. And I can tell you, it was really hard work. You know, something that's fantastic, improves the efficiency of the business right away. Nobody wants to be the first adopter. So I think, you know, so identify the early adopters for your business or technology. And of course, when you come to the fundraising, you better identify who's going to lead the round, because that's the key to success.
Wonderful. And with that, please join me to thank my panelists for such an amazing discussion. We are going to hand the time back over to Shirin and Steve. Thank you.